Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam, ala rasulillahi amma ba'du. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the beneficent. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon his final prophet and messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Let me first begin by saying I'm not an apologist. I'm not here to apologize to anyone about any aspect of Islam. When it comes to the religion of Islam, as my brother Abu Tayyib has mentioned, I embraced this religion. It wasn't gifted to me. And I embraced the religion after looking in it and at it with a very close eye. And after embracing, I was supported by my relatives, although they didn't understand a lot about Islam. But there are two extremes that I have a problem with today, being a practicing Muslim, and that is the extreme of the Muslims who go overboard and they're radical and they distort our religion and they create a lot of problems, some of which we're here trying to address. And then there's the other extreme, the apologetic Muslim, who has problems himself with some of the verses that are in the Quran, some of the statements of Prophet Muhammad. So as a result of that, he wants to acquiesce and he wants to placate people. I'm not like that. So the people who want to take those verses of the Quran that talk about corporal punishment, that talk about some real serious and harsh ways of dealing with people when they make mistakes and indiscretions, I totally buy into that. Even without being a Muslim in America, before I was a Muslim, I believed in capital punishment in America. I believed in that. I believed that there are some people who deserve to be dealt with harshly, but it should be fair and it should be just. It should be even across the board. So in regards to this issue, does Islam promote terrorism? I say unequivocally, unapologetically, without any hesitation, the classical understanding that people have about terrorism, Islam is diametrically opposed to it. And the basis of that can be found throughout the Quran and throughout the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, his words and his statements. And this is why, in dealing with many of our community members who are extreme, I don't say that they're terrorists, but they may try to justify some of the things that happen where Muslims are blowing up people and they're really guilty of that. There are people who academically, intellectually, it's not difficult dealing with them because the Quran and the Sunnah make it very clear that these things are not permissible. These people are allowed to be governed by their emotions. Many times they're very young, and most times they are outside of the mainstream fold of Islamic thought and Islamic community. So when we talk about Islam and terrorism, we're dealing with two issues going in opposite directions with basis. Now I know that there are those people who want to take the Quran and take verses of the Quran out of context. And they want to use some of the verses of the Quran to show how our religion is inherently violent. And there is terrorism in our religion. But you'll find 110% of the time, not 50% of the time, 110% of the time, people want to take those verses of the Quran and they want to use them to show, look at this and look at that. Two things happen, or two things don't happen. Number one, they always are only going to use part of that verse. Always, they are going to use part of the verse. Number two, they never, ever, ever are going to use the verse itself and the one that comes before it or after it, which always puts the verse in context. Always. Always. So I can take the Bible and I can take the book of the Jews. I can take both of those books and I can take many examples of verses just like people can do with the Quran. But I'm not here to do that. I'm here to show and to prove that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. And when I say terrorism, as one of the speakers is going to explain, that quagmire that we're presented with, the predicament that we're presented with when we just deal with the definition of the word terrorism. The first basis is the fact that Many of these verses that people use to show the dark side of al-Islam, to make people afraid of al-Islam, and there's some strong verses. I put my hand up, my wounded hand. I put it up and I say, yes, they are there. And I believe in them, and I accept them, and I support them. But the amazing thing is that these very verses, in most instances, can be used as punishments towards people who are terrorists. If in fact there are Muslims who are guilty of committing terroristic crimes and they get caught in the Islamic society, they get caught, some of those rough and tough verses will be used against them. Like the verse in chapter number 5 of the Quran. It's called the chapter of Al-Ma'idah, the tablecloth. The number of the chapter is 33 to 34. I usually read chapters of the Quran in Arabic because it helps me to translate it correctly. But because I don't have a lot of time, I'm going to do my best. But if I do start reading some things in Arabic, it's not to mesmerize anyone. It's just so that I can get a mental picture when it comes to translating it in the best way. But this verse, it says, verily those people who wage war against Allah and his messenger, and they spread mischief in the earth, then their recompense and the penalty for that is, and the verse goes on to describe some serious retribution for what they did. This verse is used when in the Muslim country someone is found planting a bomb, blowing up people, doing these types of acts of terrorism. This is one of the main verses that is used. This verse, non-Muslims who wage war against Allah and his messenger, and they fight against the Islamic State of the past, the Islamic State right now. This verse can be used for them, but they don't have a monopoly on this. This is also the Muslim person who is the Muslim, the individual who's a Muslim, who's spreading mischief in the earth. In addition to that, every Muslim knows, or he should know, and this is one of the real big problems that we have with our community members who are guilty of shedding innocent blood. Every Muslim knows that we have in our religion what is considered to be major sins and what is considered to be minor sins. All of them are dangerous, but obviously, major sins, a person has to do his best to stay away from them. The minor sins, they come as a result of the frailties of being human beings from a theological perspective. But nonetheless, they're serious as well. So the Muslim is not allowed to give the excuse, I'm a human being, I sin. No. But the major sins he has to avoid. One of the biggest of the major sins is murder. So in our religion, we have been commanded, don't be a person who not only murders, but you are not allowed to spill anyone's blood in this religion. You're not allowed to spill anyone's blood unless you had a religious reason. He's a doctor and he performed an operation, something like that. The individual is protecting himself. It was a mistake. So if you are not allowed to spill someone's blood intentionally, then clearly taking his life is something that is from the major issues and the major sins in al-Islam. And this is something that is basic and fundamental. So if terrorism was something that was allowed, and murder doesn't always necessarily have to happen when terrorism is put on the table, but this is what we're talking to, the narrative of people killing people today. The other issue, as it relates to murder, is murdering innocent people. My mother, who I just came from visiting, along with my wife, my mother, my father, my extended relatives, we're in America. A lot of things are going on in their house that go against our religion, but it's their house, it's not my house. So what I have to do is I have to adjust myself and I have to deal with that. My parents are going to cook for me and my family halal meats. They make those adjustments and accommodations for us. They're gonna cook halal meats. My wife, who wears Islamic attire for the woman. My family are going to be sensitive to that. They're going to do that, no doubt about it. My mother, my family, my relatives, they have nothing to do with the foreign policy of America as it relates to Israel. They have nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, many of them being African Americans, knowing and tasting and knowing up close the oppression that our people had to deal with and continue to deal with in America. Many times they are sympathetic to the Muslims and the Arabs who are Palestinian. So I don't know, by what stretch of a person's imagination can a Muslim, for an example, believe, because of what's going on in the foreign policy of America, the UK, other Western countries, how are you allowed to put a bomb somewhere and blow up a plane, blow up a coach, a bus, blow up a room of innocent people? In our religion, the Quran and Prophet Muhammad in his statements made it unequivocally clear. I'm talking about there is no ambiguity. The Muslim who lives in a country that may be his host country, the Muslim who comes to a country, and he came to the country by way of making agreements with the people who are in charge of that country, he's not allowed to behave in a way except in a way that's honorable. If he goes into a contract with an individual to turn around and to be a person who stabs that person in the back, or he breaks the contract unjustly, this is from the worst issues in the religion of Islam. Now, when we take it to the arena of terrorism and maiming, hurting, harming, killing people, then clearly, as I told you, when we sit and we talk to some of our youngsters who have been radicalized, some of them are extreme, it's not difficult talking to them and overpowering them with arguments. Because the only way that the Muslim is able to justify these things is without knowledge. Without any knowledge. It's just going to be an emotionally based discussion, because the religion of Islam is clear on that. Now, people will make attempts, as I told you, to bring some verses here or there, take some actions and statements of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and they're going to bring them to the table. I don't run from those issues. I try my best to put it in context, and then I let the chips fall where they may. As a matter of fact, I'll even make the bold statement. I'll make the bold statement that if it was proven to me and it was brought to my attention that Islam was a religion that supports terrorism, I'm going to be the first one to apostate and leave this religion. Because I want to do what's right. I want to be with the people who are doing the right thing in the way that they're worshiping God. I don't want to worship a racist God, white, a God who has an ethnic group or something. I don't want to be like that. And just as I don't want that nonsense, I also don't want to be a part of a religion that allows people of that religion, my people, to kill people unjustly. And then it's going to be allowed in the name of the religion? No way. Another very important issue about how Islam does not support terrorism. And this is really important, and unfortunately, even Muslims, they lose sight of this reality, and that is, in our religion, we have scholars. And scholars in Islam, they're not people who are infallible. They make mistakes, and sometimes you have good scholars, sometimes you have bad scholars. But scholars in Islam, the good scholars, when you get scholarship in this religion, you get a special position. Not a position to manipulate the people, a position of being an elitist, can do whatever you want. But the scholarship and scholars in Islam are important. As a revert, as a new Muslim, as a Muslim who may not have a lot of knowledge, when it comes to sensitive issues, we have been commanded, look and see and come to find out, what are the scholars of your religion saying? The scholars of your locale, the scholars of your country, the ones who are competent and they know what they're doing. I'm not talking about the so-called scholars for dollars. I'm not talking about the people who are incompetent. I'm not talking about the people who, the powers to be, they play the music and they dance to that tune. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the real scholars of Islam. When we look at them, we don't see any scholars with the extreme groups of Muslims. I'm talking about Muslims who are in fact guilty of committing terroristic crimes. We never see any scholars supporting groups like Boko Haram, the Shabab of Somalia. We never see them supporting ISIS. We never see them supporting Al-Qaeda. You never see it. The people who support them are people who are ignorant of the religion. And the ones who lead them, and they look at them as being scholars, they themselves are ignorant as well. So it's a classic case of the blind leading the blind. So I think this is a very critical point, that you're not going to find in Islam a group of qualified, bona fide scholars who are coming out and they're saying things. So in concluding, just to elaborate and make that last point clear, the scholars of Islam, the competent ones, the ones who know what they're doing, and they're well known, these are the ones you will never find with these groups who are extreme in our religion. You'll never find it. And we look forward, inshallah, God willing, to have more of a robust discussion when the Q&A session comes around. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا